The stars flickered in the darkness of space, a cold, endless void that seemed to stretch forever. The Exceltary warship, a massive ship with smooth, metallic surfaces and glowing blue lights, hovered silently just outside Earth's atmosphere. Its crew, the most advanced species in the galaxy, watched the tiny blue planet with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. They had been following Earth for months, tracking the rapid rise of human military technology, and something about it didn't sit right with them. Sharon, the first mate of the Exceltary Queen, paced back and forth on the bridge of the warship. He was tall and imposing, his pale skin almost glowing in the dim light of the control room. His sharp, almond-shaped eyes scanned the data flowing across the screens. The humans had begun to fight back. The galaxy's most powerful fleets, once certain of their dominance, had suffered shocking defeats at the hands of this strange, primitive species. How is this possible? Jaren muttered to himself. These humans are nothing. They don't even have the basic technology we possess. His crew members, equally advanced, but just as puzzled, exchanged glances. They had never seen anything like this. Humans, who should have been easy prey, had been putting up a fight. And not just a small one, an impressive one. Jaren's queen, Telnera, had sent him on this mission to investigate Earth's sudden rise in military strength. The humans were an anomaly. How could a species that lacked the advanced technology and physical superiority of the Exceltary possibly stand a chance against them? What was their secret? "Prepare the landing craft," Jaren ordered, his voice commanding. "I will go down to Earth. It's time to see this human strength for myself." The crew obeyed, setting the coordinates for Earth's largest military base. Jaren had been briefed on the humans' abilities to endure long battles and push their bodies to the limits, but he needed to see it firsthand. Was it true? Or was there something more going on that the Exceltary hadn't discovered? The craft descended toward Earth, cutting through the atmosphere with a hiss. Below, the lights of the human cities glittered like 1,000 fireflies, unaware that an alien force was about to land. Landing on Earth, Jaren stepped off the craft onto the hard soil of Earth, a place that seemed almost too ordinary for something so extraordinary to be happening. He could feel the hum of energy in the air, the pulse of life beneath his feet. Around him, soldiers in human uniforms, armed with rifles and strange, advanced gadgets, stood at attention. They weren't afraid of him, though they should have been. This was a planet of weaklings, after all, or so he thought. The commander of the base, a woman with short brown hair and steely eyes, approached him. "Welcome to Earth," she said, her tone neutral but firm. "I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell. You're here to see our military strength, correct?" Jaren nodded, his eyes narrowing. He could sense the fire in her, the resolve that burned inside her, something that he hadn't expected from a human. "Yes," he replied, his voice cold. "I am here to witness your so-called strength. Show me what you have." Without a word, Mitchell turned and gestured for him to follow. They walked through the base, past rows of soldiers in training, through high-tech command rooms, and into a massive arena. There, hundreds of humans were preparing for what looked like a combat simulation. Jaren watched in silence as the humans geared up, their eyes focused and determined. Some were small and unassuming, while others were tall and muscular, but all of them shared a singular purpose: to fight. "You've gathered all your best soldiers here, I assume?" Jaren asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. Mitchell smiled faintly. "These aren't the best. These are just the ones who keep fighting, no matter how tired they get." Jaren raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "And what makes you think they can stand up to us?" Mitchell turned to face him, her gaze unwavering. "You'll see. The battle begins." The simulation began. The humans faced off against holographic enemies that mimicked alien creatures from various planets. Jaren watched, expecting them to tire quickly, to falter under the pressure. But they didn't. They moved with surprising speed and precision, coordinating their attacks with military efficiency. Hours passed, and still they fought, pushing their bodies and minds to the edge. Jaren stood there, watching in growing disbelief. He couldn't understand it. These humans were supposed to be weak. They didn't have the same physical advantages that the Excelteri had, and yet they fought with an intensity that was almost alien to him. The battle continued through the night, and Jaren felt something he hadn't expected, a growing sense of respect for these strange creatures. Cliffhanger. As dawn began to break over the horizon, Jaren found himself at a loss for words. The humans were still standing, still fighting. Their bodies were battered, their movements slower, but they hadn't stopped. How long can they keep this up? Jaren whispered to himself. Captain Mitchell turned to him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. As long as it takes. Jaren's mind raced. What had he gotten himself into? Jaren stood in stunned silence as the last of the human soldiers finished the simulation. They were exhausted, their faces bruised and their clothes torn, but they had held their ground. They hadn't collapsed. They hadn't given up. It was something Jaren couldn't fully understand. How could a species so weak endure so much? Captain Mitchell approached him, her face showing the signs of a long night, but still full of determination. She wiped the sweat from her brow and gave him a nod. You see it now, don't you? Humans don't stop fighting until we're all out of options. Jaren couldn't help but nod, still processing what he had witnessed. But this doesn't make sense. You fight like creatures with greater strength and stamina. You're not supposed to last this long. Mitchell smiled faintly. Maybe that's what sets us apart. It's not about being the strongest or fastest. It's about never giving up, no matter what. Jaren was silent, his mind racing. His species, the Excelteri, were the pinnacle of strength and intellect, capable of feats far beyond any human. Yet, here on Earth, a race that he had once written off as primitive was showing him something unexpected, something terrifying. Humans don't just survive, Mitchell continued. We push forward. Even when we're on the brink, we keep moving. Jaren was still processing, but he knew one thing. He had to understand this human spirit more. It wasn't something he had ever encountered before, and he could not ignore it. The proposition. Later that day, Jaren met with the leaders of Earth's military, including Mitchell. He stood before them in a high-tech command room, a room filled with screens showing Earth's defense strategies and global positions. I've seen enough, Jaren said, his voice firm. I've seen how your soldiers endure. But I have to ask, what makes you think you can win against forces far more powerful than yourselves? You've been fighting well, but that won't be enough. General Roberts, a tall man with a stern face, glanced at Mitchell before turning back to Jaren. We don't expect to win just by fighting, Roberts said, his voice steady. We expect to win because we never stop trying. That's what makes us dangerous. Jaren wasn't convinced. That's all. You rely on some idea of persistence. Mitchell's eyes sparkled with determination as she stepped forward. It's not just persistence. It's our will to protect our people, our world. That's what drives us to keep going, even when we're outmatched. Jaren listened carefully. I understand your spirit, human, but I need to see it for myself. I want to see how far you can truly go. His eyes narrowed. I propose a challenge. The challenge unfolds. Jaren laid out the terms of his challenge, a massive test, a multi-phase survival exercise that would push humanity to its absolute limits. There would be alien forces in the arena, creatures and conditions unlike anything humans had faced before. Only the strongest, most resourceful soldiers would make it to the end. You want to prove yourselves, Jaren said. Then let's see if you can survive this trial. Mitchell, without hesitation, stepped forward. We'll take your challenge. Jaren's lips curled into a faint smile. He was confident that the humans would crumble under the pressure. He had seen their endurance, but that was nothing compared to the forces they would face in this challenge. The trial began the very next day. A specially designed arena was set up on a barren moon, far from Earth. The humans would be dropped into this hostile environment with only the gear they could carry. They would face alien predators, extreme temperatures, and environmental hazards that could kill them in seconds. Jaren stood watching from a control room high above the arena. His eyes scanned the human soldiers as they dropped into the moon's desolate landscape. Some of them staggered upon landing, but they quickly regained their footing. They gathered in small groups, assessing the environment and their resources. "The test begins now," Jaren muttered to himself, waiting to see how long the humans would last. The first phase. Hours passed, and Jaren watched in disbelief as the humans worked together to survive. They built shelter, set traps, and hunted strange alien creatures for food. The alien predators that roamed the landscape attacked in waves, but the humans fought back with brutal efficiency. They didn't run when faced with danger. They didn't give in. They stood and fought, refusing to back down. "Unbelievable," Jaren whispered to himself. The humans were enduring far better than he had expected. As the sun set on the barren moon, the humans were still standing. Most of them were bruised and battered, their energy running low, but they hadn't collapsed. They kept moving forward, fighting against the odds. Jaren began to wonder if perhaps he had underestimated these humans. Cliffhanger. As the night drew closer, the humans prepared for what would be the most difficult part of the trial, surviving the night in the alien wilderness. Jaren's eyes narrowed as he watched Mitchell and her soldiers huddle together for warmth, their faces set with determination. The real test begins now, Jaren thought, his mind focused on the one thing he couldn't understand. How long would these humans last? As the cold night air began to bite into their skin, Jaren waited, almost certain the humans would finally break. But deep inside, a small, uneasy part of him whispered, maybe they won't. The moon's surface was harsh and unforgiving, a barren wasteland covered in jagged rocks and dust. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the soldiers of Earth in the cold, dark silence of the alien world. The wind howled through the jagged cliffs, carrying with it an eerie chill that bit through their clothes, making every breath a struggle. Captain Sarah Mitchell huddled with her team of soldiers in a makeshift shelter they had built from the remains of an alien shipwreck. It wasn't much, but it was enough to shield them from the wind. Still, the cold was relentless, seeping into their bones and slowing their movements. Their faces were grim, but their eyes, those eyes, held something that Terry had never seen before: determination. Jaren stood high above them in the observation room, his eyes fixed on the humans below. His alien gaze could pierce through the dark, and he watched closely as they made their final preparations for the night. The humans had fought off alien predators and braved the deadly landscape all day, yet now, as night fell, they were faced with their greatest challenge yet. They had to survive the cold. The freezing temperatures would drop far below anything they had experienced on Earth. To Jaren, it was a simple test. How long would these fragile creatures last before the harsh conditions broke them? The first mate's expression remained stoic, but inside, something stirred. He had expected the humans to fall apart by now. It wasn't possible for them to endure this much suffering. They weren't like the Terry, superior in every way. And yet, something about these humans made him question everything he knew. Survival through the night. As the night deepened, Jaren could see the humans struggle. Their breath puffed in the cold air, and their movements were slower than before. They huddled together, forming tight circles for warmth. Mitchell, though visibly exhausted, kept her soldiers focused. "Stay close. We can't afford to lose anyone," she ordered, her voice low but steady. The soldiers nodded, their eyes still sharp despite their fatigue. They worked as a team, feeding small fires they'd managed to start with whatever they could find. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them some warmth. As the hours stretched on, their fire seemed to be the only thing standing between them and the freezing void of space. Jaren watched as one of the soldiers, A young man named Aaron started to shiver uncontrollably. His teeth chattered, and his face grew pale. The cold had taken its toll, and the freezing temperatures were starting to overwhelm him. Jaren couldn't help but think this was the moment the human would break, like all the others had before him. He leaned forward in the observation room, eager to see how the humans would handle the situation. But instead of giving in, Aaron forced himself to his feet, his movements slow and stiff. Mitchell, noticing his struggle, quickly rushed to his side, guiding him back to the fire. She wrapped him in an emergency thermal blanket and gave him a few quick words of encouragement. "We're almost there, Aaron," Mitchell said, her voice soft but strong. "Stay with us? All right. We've got this." The young soldier nodded weakly, a faint smile crossing his lips. It was enough to keep him going for just a little while longer. The long wait. As the night wore on, the humans continued to fight the cold, their bodies struggling to maintain heat. Jaren had expected them to give up by now, but they just kept going, pushing through each moment as though they were born to endure. The harsh winds howled across the moon's surface, but the humans refused to yield. One of Jaren's crew members, a Celtari scientist named Talnara, turned to him with an expression of curiosity. "They haven't broken yet, first mate. Why do you think that is?" Jaren didn't answer at first. He simply watched the humans below, his thoughts racing. It was clear now, the humans weren't just fighting the environment. They were fighting for something more, something intangible. "They are stubborn," Jaren finally muttered, his voice laced with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "I've never seen anything like it. They fight not because they have to, but because they can. They keep moving forward." The unexpected endurance. As the hours passed and the night grew colder, Jaren's mind began to shift. He had watched countless species face challenges far greater than this. The Celtari, for instance, could survive extremes of temperature, radiation, and pressure that would destroy any lesser being. But the humans were doing something far more profound. They were surviving out of sheer willpower. Sharon's eyes shifted toward Mitchell, who was still overseeing the soldiers. She didn't seem like she was in control. No, she seemed in tune with her soldiers, connected to them. They were fighting together, as one unit, a single force against the cold, the predators, and the overwhelming odds. By dawn, when the first light of the alien sun began to creep over the horizon, Jaren found himself staring at the scene below with a new understanding. The humans had made it through the night. They hadn't just survived, they had endured, and more than that, they had thrived. Jaren's heart raced as he tried to make sense of what he was witnessing. He had been so certain that the humans would fail, that their physical limitations would be their downfall. But now, it was clear. It wasn't just their bodies that were strong, it was their spirit. Their ability to push past pain, fear, and exhaustion was something Jaren had never seen before. Cliffhanger. As the humans began to rise, stretching and preparing for another day of survival, Jaren knew that this trial was far from over. The next phase would be even more brutal, but something inside him had shifted. He now knew that defeating these humans would not be as easy as he had once thought. And for the first time, Jaren began to wonder, could they really go all night? Could they go even longer? The thought lingered in his mind as he watched the humans below, ready to face whatever came next. The cold moonlit morning passed quickly, and the harsh reality of the test was far from over. Jaren observed the humans from his high-tech observation room, his eyes narrowing with focus. They had survived the night. They had endured the freezing cold, fought off alien predators, and resisted the elements. But this was only the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come. After a brief rest, Mitchell and her soldiers were back on their feet, moving in formation. Their faces were tired, their clothes torn and stained with dirt, but there was something unbreakable about them. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were survivors. Jaren felt an unsettling twinge of respect, mixed with confusion. These humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting with something deeper, something that was hard to explain. His own species had superior strength and intelligence, yet the human's resilience was something he hadn't anticipated. The next trial. The arena that had once been their home for the night now became a gauntlet. As Jaren gave the order from the control room, the ground beneath the humans began to rumble. Suddenly, massive walls of rock shot up, blocking their path and splitting them into smaller groups. The humans had no choice but to press on, each group forced to fight in its own way, using whatever they had at hand. Mitchell was in the lead, her mind sharp despite the exhaustion. She gave quick orders, telling her team to stay close, watch their backs, and move quickly. They knew they couldn't afford to waste time. The walls of rock were not just obstacles. They were part of the test. They needed to climb, move, and adapt to survive. Keep moving, stay alert. Mitchell shouted as her team climbed the jagged rocks. Their hands bullied from the sharp edges, but they didn't stop. They had no choice. Jaren watched them with growing amazement. His species would have used technology to cut through the rocks in seconds. But the humans, they were using their hands, their strength, and their will to survive. With every painful step, Jaren could see it more clearly. The human spirit was something beyond physical power. It was pure determination. The Xelteri's dilemma. As the humans continued to press forward, Jaren found himself in a state of confusion. He had expected them to break, to beg for mercy, to fail in some way. But they didn't. He had witnessed their will to fight. But this was something different. The humans were changing the rules of survival. It wasn't just about strength or endurance. It was about never backing down. Why? Jaren muttered, almost to himself. Why do they keep going? What makes them so different? Talnara, the Xelteri scientist who had been observing with him, answered quietly. It's their will to survive. First mate, it's something deeper than we understand. Their emotions, their connections to each other, to their world. It makes them stronger than they should be. Jaren didn't respond. He couldn't. Talnara was right. The humans were fighting not just for victory, but for something more, something that made them far more dangerous than their physical capabilities suggested. The moment of truth. Hours passed, and the humans finally reached the other side of the rocky maze. They were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but they were still standing. Their progress had been slow, but it was steady. Mitchell's team had managed to overcome every obstacle, despite the immense difficulty. But as they reached the final stretch of the maze, Jaren prepared to test them once again. The ground suddenly shook violently beneath them. From the depths of the earth, massive creatures began to emerge, towering over the humans. Their eyes glowed with a deadly light, and their mouths dripped with acidic saliva. These were the most dangerous creatures that Xelteri had bred, designed specifically to crush any force that dared challenge them. Jaren watched with cold satisfaction. The humans had made it this far, but now they would face their toughest challenge yet. The creatures charged, their massive bodies thundering toward the humans with terrifying speed. Mitchell's team immediately formed a defensive line, their weapons raised, ready to fight. They had no choice but to face the monsters head-on. Jaren watched intently, his mind calculating the odds. These creatures were designed to overwhelm any army. No human could survive this. But he was wrong. A glimmer of hope. As the creatures charged, Mitchell gave a quick, decisive order. Form a perimeter. Keep them back. The humans moved with precision, firing their weapons and using everything they had learned to fight off the creatures. The ground trembled under the weight of the beasts, but the humans held their ground. They were outmatched, yes, but they fought with everything they had, fighting not just to survive, but to prove something to themselves. Jaren's mouth went dry as he watched them. The humans didn't flinch. They didn't fall back. They fought like lions, with heart, determination, and unity. Slowly but surely, they began to push the monsters back, one by one. Jaren couldn't believe what he was seeing. The humans were winning. Cliffhanger. The last of the creatures fell, its massive body crumpling to the ground with a deafening crash. The humans stood victorious, their bodies bruised and battered, but their spirits unbroken. They had overcome the impossible. Jaren stood in silence, staring at the scene below. He had expected them to fall, but instead they had proven him wrong. The humans had shown him something that shook him to his core. For the first time, Jaren realized that his mission had changed. This wasn't just about observing humanity anymore. It was about understanding how such fragile beings could become so strong. And as the humans regrouped, preparing for whatever came next, Jaren knew one thing for certain. He had underestimated them. The storm continued to rage, howling through the alien landscape with a force Jaren had never seen before. Lightning crackled through the air, splitting the sky into jagged flashes of white and blue. The ground shook beneath the humans' feet, and yet they did not falter. They pushed forward, determined to survive. Mitchell's face was grim, her eyes narrowed as she led her soldiers through the violent storm. Their progress had slowed, the cold biting at their exposed skin, but the group kept moving, step by step. They were no longer just surviving. They were fighting for something more. They were fighting for victory, for their place in this harsh alien world. Jaren watched from the safety of the observation room, his hands gripping the edge of his control panel. He had never been so captivated by a species before. He had seen armies crumble under far less. But the humans, they were relentless. Unyielding resolve. Mitchell looked at her team as they struggled against the wind. Each soldier was exhausted, their faces pale from the cold and the strain of the journey. But none of them complained. None of them turned back. They simply followed Mitchell's lead, trusting her completely. "Keep going, just a little further," Mitchell urged, her voice firm. She knew that if they stopped, even for a moment, the storm could be their end. The cold was already seeping into their bones, and the chasm before them seemed to stretch on forever. But Mitchell wasn't about to let that stop them. The storm wasn't their only enemy. With each step, they neared the edge of the massive chasm, a bottomless pit that seemed to swallow the light. The earth trembled beneath them, and Jaren knew that the humans were about to face their final test. A new fear. Jaren's eyes widened as he saw what was coming. From the depths of the chasm, a shadow began to rise. The ground trembled as the creature emerged from the darkness, a massive insectoid behemoth towering over the humans. Its many legs moved with terrifying speed, and its mouth opened, revealing rows of sharp, glowing teeth. The creature was the ultimate test. The Celteri had bred it to be the most dangerous predator, capable of wiping out entire armies. It was faster, stronger, and more lethal than anything the humans had faced before. Jaren's heart raced as he watched, knowing that this was the end of the line for the humans. They couldn't survive this. Mitchell and her team saw the creature at the same moment, and for a brief second, there was silence. It was the largest creature they had ever seen, and it was heading straight for them. But instead of retreating, Mitchell took a deep breath and raised her weapon. "Get ready," she said, her voice calm but filled with purpose. "We fight. The fight for survival." The humans immediately formed a defensive circle around Mitchell. Their weapons were ready, but they knew that no amount of firepower could match the size and speed of the creature. This would not be a fight of strength. It would be a fight of strategy and sheer will. The creature charged, its massive form moving with incredible speed. The ground shook with each of its steps, and the air was filled with the sound of its screeching roar. The humans opened fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness, but the creature's thick armor absorbed the blasts, barely flinching. Mitchell quickly adjusted their tactics. "Move, stay close," she shouted, leading the charge as she dodged the creature's attacks. The team worked together in perfect harmony, using their agility and teamwork to avoid the creature's strikes. One soldier, Aaron, flanked the creature, distracting it long enough for the others to land a direct hit to its weak spot. The creature screamed in pain, but it didn't stop. It was faster than they anticipated, and every time they managed to wound it, it retaliated with deadly force. Mitchell's heart pounded as she watched her team struggle to keep up with the creature's ferocity. But she saw something else too, something that gave her hope. The creature was growing tired. Despite its size and strength, it was no match for the humans' coordination and relentless drive. The turning point. As the battle continued, the humans began to find their rhythm. Mitchell and her team used their environment to their advantage, leading the creature into a narrow gap between two giant boulders. There, the creature's size became its weakness. The humans were able to land a few more shots in its exposed underbelly. With one final coordinated strike, they managed to bring the creature down. It let out a deafening roar before collapsing, its massive body hitting the ground with a mighty thud. The humans stood, panting, covered in sweat and dirt, but alive. They had done it. Sharon's jaw tightened in disbelief. He had watched the entire fight unfold, and for the first time, he found himself questioning everything he had thought he knew about strength and survival. The humans had faced impossible odds and come out on top. He had expected them to fail, but they had proven him wrong. Cliffhanger. The humans stood victorious, but their battle was far from over. Sharon knew that this was only one obstacle in a series of challenges they would face. He had underestimated them before, and now he couldn't help but wonder, what else would they be capable of? As the storm began to subside, Mitchell's team regrouped, their expressions tired but determined. They had proven their strength, their will, and their resilience, and they knew the next challenge was already waiting for them. Zarin watched them, his thoughts a whirlwind. These humans had proven they could fight through anything. But what would happen when they faced the true heart of the Celtari challenge? What would happen when their strength was tested to its absolute limit? He didn't know, but he was about to find out. The storm had passed, leaving behind a still, eerie quiet. The massive chasm was now visible in full, its dark depths stretching down into the unknown. Mitchell and her team were battered, bruised, and worn out from the battles they had fought. But they had no choice but to move forward. There was no turning back. Mitchell looked at her soldiers, each one standing tall despite the exhaustion. They had already faced monsters, deadly storms, and the harshest terrain. But something told her that the greatest challenge was yet to come. She knew that Celtari were watching, observing every move they made. "We've made it this far," Mitchell said, her voice steady despite the tension. "But we need to stay focused. Whatever happens next, we face it together." Her words were simple, but they rang with truth. The team had come a long way, and they weren't going to stop now. They had faced death and survived, and they would do it again if they had to. The Great Descent. Sharon's heart raced as he watched the humans approach the edge of the chasm. He had designed this final trial to break them, to test their limits in every way possible. The descent into the depths was the most dangerous part. If they made it down, there was no guarantee they would come back. "This is it," Sharon muttered to himself. "The last test." The humans would have to climb down into the chasm using only ropes and their bare hands. The walls were steep and jagged, the rocks slippery from the storm, and the very air was heavy with danger. One wrong move, and they could fall to their deaths. But Mitchell didn't hesitate. She knew what they had to do. "Let's move," Mitchell ordered, taking the first step onto the rope. Her team followed her lead, each of them carefully making their way down into the dark abyss below. The descent. The climb was treacherous. The walls of the chasm seemed to close in around them, and the narrow ledges provided little room to maneuver. As they descended deeper, the air grew thicker, and their progress slowed. Every soldier's hands were raw from gripping the ropes, and their legs burned with each step. But they kept going. They had no other choice. Mitchell glanced up, watching her team carefully as they made their way down. Despite the physical strain, their resolve was unshakable. They moved as one, pulling each other up when one slipped, steadying each other when the ropes started to fray. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for each other. Jaren watched from his control room, his mind racing. This was more than he had expected. The humans were so much more than just a test. They were proving something to him, to each other, and to themselves. They weren't just fighting for victory. They were fighting for their very existence. The final push. Hours passed, and the humans were deep within the chasm now. They had overcome the steepest parts of the descent and were nearing the bottom. But the final challenge awaited them. The ground below them trembled, and the walls of the chasm began to shift. Something was wrong. The Excelteri had set a final trap, one that would crush them if they weren't careful. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath them, and the ledge they were standing on collapsed. Mitchell screamed as she lost her footing, but in that instant, Aaron grabbed her arm and yanked her back to safety. "We're not done yet," Aaron said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We get through this together." Mitchell nodded, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of their mission more than ever. They had come this far, but now it was time to give everything they had left. The final encounter. As they neared the bottom of the chasm, the final test revealed itself. From the depths of the earth, a massive mechanical creature rose, its glowing eyes scanning the humans with cold, calculated precision. It was the ultimate weapon, a creation designed to annihilate anyone who dared to challenge the Excelteri. Mitchell's team immediately took defensive positions. The creature towered over them, its metal body reflecting the dim light of the chasm. Its weapons hummed with energy, and its movements were swift and brutal. But Mitchell wasn't afraid. She had led her team through every trial, and she would lead them through this one. "We fight. We win. No matter what," she said. Her words were a rallying cry. The team fired their weapons, targeting the creature's weak points, but it wasn't enough. The creature adapted quickly, blocking their attacks and retaliating with devastating force. The final victory. The battle raged on, but the humans fought with everything they had. They were bruised, bloodied, and exhausted, but they refused to back down. They had come too far. They had fought too hard. Mitchell spotted a gap in the creature's armor. "There, hit it with everything you've got," she shouted. Her team focused their fire on the weak spot, and with one final, overwhelming blast, the creature collapsed, its massive frame crumbling to the ground in a heap of sparks and metal. The humans stood victorious once again. They had done the impossible. They had survived the Excelteri's final trial. Jaren's realization. Jaren watched in silence as the humans celebrated their victory. He had designed the trials to break them, to prove that they were not strong enough to survive. But now he realized that he had been wrong. The humans had faced every challenge with a strength he could not comprehend. For the first time, Jaren felt something unexpected: admiration. He had witnessed their courage, their will to survive, and their ability to fight through every hardship. They were not just survivors. They were warriors, and they had earned their place in the universe. As he watched them, Jaren knew that humanity had just begun its journey. The galaxy would never be the same again. Jaren watched from the observation room, his eyes narrowed in disbelief. The humans had done it. They had faced down the Excelteri's greatest creatures and won. The creatures he had designed to break their spirit lay dead on the ground, their monstrous forms defeated by the very species he had once considered weak. For a moment, Jaren felt a strange shift within himself. The humans were not like the other species he had encountered. They weren't just surviving. They were overcoming. How? He thought. How do they do it? He had spent days observing them, analyzing their behavior, their tactics, and their will to survive. Nothing about them made sense in the way he understood strength. They were smaller, slower, and physically weaker than most species he had encountered, yet they kept fighting, pushing themselves to their limits. The reflection. As the humans caught their breath, Mitchell's voice echoed through the comms, strong and steady. "We did it, but we're not done yet. Stay sharp. We've still got a long way to go." Her words carried through the team, igniting a renewed energy in the soldiers despite their exhaustion. Jaren listened intently, a mix of awe and frustration swirling inside him. These humans were relentless, and it was clear that their greatest strength wasn't their bodies. It was their will to fight, to keep moving forward, no matter what. Jaren turned away from the observation window, feeling the slight unease he couldn't shake. He had never experienced anything like this before. He had seen entire civilizations crumble in the face of far less. Yet these humans, with nothing but their grit and determination, had managed to push through every obstacle thrown their way. "They will never stop," Talnera said softly from behind him, her voice filled with quiet respect. "It's like they've tapped into something deeper than survival." Jaren didn't respond immediately. His mind raced, processing everything he had witnessed. The humans had shown him that their strength didn't come from power alone. It came from something else entirely. It was their unity, their refusal to surrender, even in the face of death. The next trial. After a brief rest, the humans were forced to continue. The Exceltary had planned the next challenge carefully. The terrain would become more dangerous, and the obstacles more extreme. Jaren wanted to see how far the humans could go before they broke. This trial would be different from the previous ones. It would test them in ways they couldn't predict. Mitchell and her team moved through the alien landscape, their bodies aching but their spirits still strong. They crossed vast plains of jagged rock, where the wind howled like a wild animal, and the temperature dipped to levels that would freeze lesser beings instantly. Despite the harsh conditions, the humans pushed forward, working together to build shelter and find food. Jaren had never seen anything like it. The humans were so far beyond what he had expected. Every time they stumbled, they picked themselves back up. Every time they failed, they tried again. He had thought the cold, the monsters, and the impossible terrain would break them. But the humans were not afraid of failure. They had learned from it. The rising tension. As the humans pressed on, Jaren could see that they were nearing the final stage of the challenge. The terrain was becoming even more unpredictable. Massive chasms appeared in their path, some of them deep enough to swallow entire buildings. The air grew thin, and each step was harder than the last. Yet Mitchell led them with unwavering confidence. She guided her soldiers with calm precision, never letting fear show. Her leadership was the glue that held the team together. She pushed them when they needed it, but also knew when to let them rest. They were a unit, a force that worked together as one. They were strong because they didn't fight alone. Jaren could see how the humans operated in unison, their minds and hearts aligned in a single purpose. They weren't just trying to survive. They were trying to prove something to themselves, to each other. They were fighting for more than victory. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy. The unexpected struggle. Just as the humans thought they had made it through the worst, a new obstacle appeared. From the depths of the chasm before them, a massive storm cloud formed, dark and ominous. The winds howled, and the temperature dropped rapidly as lightning crackled across the sky. Jaren smirked, expecting the storm to break the human spirits. He watched, waiting for them to retreat or collapse. But instead of panicking, Mitchell stood tall, her eyes scanning the storm with focused determination. "We move through it," she said, her voice carrying over the roar of the storm. "We don't turn back." Her team nodded, rallying behind her. Despite the fierce winds and the bitter cold, they pressed forward, one step at a time. Jaren's smirk faltered. The storm was fierce, the worst of all the trials they had faced. But instead of surrendering, the humans adapted. They worked together to shield each other from the storm, using whatever tools they had to survive. Cliffhanger. Jaren's mind raced as he watched them move through the storm. How could they do this? The storm raged around them, and still the humans pushed forward. He had expected them to break. He had expected them to falter. But they didn't. The storm grew stronger, and the ground beneath them began to shake. As a massive fissure opened up in the earth, threatening to swallow them whole. Jaren could feel his confidence begin to crack. Could the humans truly survive this last trial? Or had they finally met their match? The storm raged on, but the humans did not stop. With every step, they seemed to become more determined, more unstoppable. Jaren's heart pounded as he waited for the moment they would fall. But that moment never came. And in that silence, Jaren realized something. Maybe the humans would never fall.